The horror in Paris has raised urgent and emotional questions about whether America should accept refugees from Syria. Some believe turning these people away simply makes sense, saying they pose a terror threat. Others say that attitude is simply un-American. For the tired masses fleeing the war in Syria, global sentiment seems to have changed swiftly and severely. Just months ago, the world was aghast over images like this: a lifeless Syrian boy washed up on a beach in Turkey after he and his family tried to make it to Greece. His father, inconsolable. Everything is gone, he said. It led to an outpouring of empathy and interest. We followed the stories of tens of thousands of refugees crossing borders, searching for safety.
This is the largest mass migration in the history of Europe since World War II. This is the front lines.
While they were sometimes met with resistance, for the most part, it seemed like the world wanted to help. But now, after Paris, that may be starting to change. One of the terrorists killed during Friday's attacks was found with a fake Syrian passport, identifying him as a refugee, stoking fears that ISIS may be using the human tide flowing out of Syria as a way to camouflage its killers. In Europe, we're now seeing anti-immigrant protests in the streets. And here at home, governors from more than half the states now want to close the door to Syrian refugees. Bravo! A shift that is troubling to refugees who have already resettled here. People like Mohammed al-Halala and his 8 children. He tells us he fled Syria 2 years ago because of the indiscriminate killing, that nobody was safe. He says they were welcomed in this new community in Arizona and that they felt safe here. But since the attacks in Paris, the governor of Arizona has said he doesn't want any more refugees from Syria. And this father now says he is disappointed that the actions of a few terrorists have affected the lives of so many, fleeing so much horror. He feels especially badly, he says, about the children, who are, of course, blameless. And it turns out, according to the UN Human Rights Commission, more than 75% of Syrian refugees, the people many states are trying to block, are in fact women and children.
People who come here are vulnerable people, widows, orphans, families who've lost everything, and they're given a new chance here after very careful consideration by very well-informed people right across the U.S. government.
And today, the mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio, making the case that the children are the reason to keep the door open to those suffering.
This is the cost of not bringing in people who are innocent victims of a humanitarian crisis. This child's death was on the front pages of newspapers all over the world. This image gripped the world, literally. Governor Christie specifically said he did not think it was appropriate for small children to be brought in. Is this what he wants to see happen to people? Is this what he wants to see happen to children? We don't accept that here in New York City.
And even after the attacks on his own country, the president of France seems to agree, saying he remains committed to taking in France's share of the refugees pouring into Europe. But Texas Senator Ted Cruz and others think this kind of policy is simply too risky. He told my colleague John Carl he wants to ban all Syrian refugees who are Muslim.
So you put religiously say no Muslims, but will allow the Christians in? That's your position?
From Middle Eastern countries where ISIS and Al-Qaeda have control of significant parts of those countries.
You're
and the
saying
reason
no Muslims, only Christians.
John,
is that your position?
John, can you say radical Islamic terrorism?
I can say radical Islamic terrorism.
Okay,
no problem. I'm asking your position.
Between.
To be clear, you're saying no Muslims, only Christians.
Christians are different in the Middle East.
President Obama responding, calling that proposal un-American.
They've been playing on fear in order to try to score political points or to advance their campaigns. And it's irresponsible. And it's contrary to who we are. And it needs to stop because the world is watching.
Senator Cruz then firing back.
But I would encourage you, Mr. President, come back and insult me to my face. Let's have a debate on Syrian refugees right now.
But one governor isn't waiting for this debate to play out.
The letter was addressed to me.
Carlene Miller, a refugee coordinator, was about to place a family from Syria in Indiana when she was informed that her governor had pulled support for the program.
Basically, the letter just said that the governor had directed them to cease services to refugees.
Miller says she had to act quickly to find the family another home.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Tonight, this family starting a new life in Connecticut, where the governor met them with open arms.
I have to say they were absolutely wonderful and charming folks.
But others are concerned that this anti-refugee sentiment is exactly what ISIS wants.
As ISIS has written about extensively in their magazine, they seek to destroy this quote-unquote gray zone of coexistence between Muslims and their Western societies. And because we're starting to see the largest refugee exodus since World War II, they definitely want to see this anti-Muslim backlash in the West. They want to see this Islamophobia in America in the Republican presidential campaigns, because it will show to Muslims around the world that Muslims are not welcome in the West.
But critics point to cases where the screening process in America has failed. In 2009, 2 men from Iraq with terrorist ties were resettled in Kentucky. They were then arrested in an FBI sting, accused of supporting insurgents back in Iraq. After suspending the resettlement program for 6 months, officials say they've tightened the security protocols.
You have a much better process. And if there is any doubt at all about someone, if some aspect of their story, their biography that they give can't be verified, they don't get in.
But this kind of perspective and reassurance may ultimately not carry the day, because while the needs of the refugees may be great, so too is the fear.